For 9 months, we've been living through the biggest public health emergency in living memory. But for years, Scotland has been facing another crisis, the rising number of people who die from drugs. We're already the worst country in Europe for drugs deaths, and figures released today show that 2019 was the worst year on record here, with 1,264 people dying from drug misuse.
It's the 6th year in a row that the number has risen, and a 6% increase on the year before. Of course, we have no idea how many people have died from drugs in 2020, but experts warn the pandemic has only made this crisis far worse. Here with the full detail is the Nine's social affairs correspondent, Chris Clements.
In another year of record drug deaths, the front line. Outreach workers in Edinburgh with the life-saving drug naloxone, which reverses the effects of opioid overdoses. Mark is among the most vulnerable. He's in his mid-50s, has been a heroin user for 4 decades, but has been off drugs for 8 months.
I was using heroin at the latter end, quite a lot of heroin. I mean, I've got a chance to get my life sorted out. I've got a chance. When I see these people dying, I think I've got a chance to do this now and get on with my life.
He's one of the lucky ones. Today's figures show the number of those who died has increased once again, a 6% rise to 1,264 at a rate 3.5 times higher than the rest of the UK. More than half of those who died had taken heroin or morphine. 7 out of 10 of them were male, and the older generation were worst hit. 2/3 were aged between 35 and 54. These figures are 5 months late, after a toxicology backlog that needed £300,000 of extra funding to clear. The crisis has prompted radical, if not wholly legal action. For 3 months, Peter Criken and former MP Paul Sweeney have been running an injecting van, something they say helps prevent overdose deaths among Glasgow's drug-using population.
The alternative is injecting in the rat-infested alleyway full of faeces, which is 20 yards from where we're standing. The most worrying aspect of that is that we're only just receiving the statistics for 2019 at the end of 2020. We're going through a public health emergency.
But that's only part of the picture. Medical treatment has been expanded to include heroin prescribing in Glasgow. But the person charged with spearheading the effort to turn the tide says measures in place today will take years to have an effect.
In Scotland, we think it's about 40% of people who could be in treatment are, and that's not enough. The really important bit of the package is about making sure people can access treatment that suits them, that they want, when they need it.
Today at Holyrood, the Public Health Minister came under fire over the government's handling of the crisis.
If he won't resign and do the right thing, will he at least allow this Parliament to see what the task force is doing and let us sit round that table and find a way forward?
I tried heroin at 15 for the first time. Just once, I told myself, little did I know that this choice, my choice, would destroy my entire youth.
Lee Hollinshead, a BBC social contributor who discussed his own battles with heroin addiction. In December 2019, he relapsed, and in June this year, he died. Another suspected overdose. Lee is one of the lost of 2020. A member of a generation described as neglected and underserved in a country that's once again been described as the worst in Europe for drug deaths. Chris Clements, BBC News.
Well, a little while ago, Chris spoke to the Public Health Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick. As you saw there, Monica Lennon called for his resignation in Parliament today.
Compared to the rest of the UK as a whole, Scotland has a drug death rate 3.5 times that of the rest of the UK. Why is that, in your opinion?
So that's a really difficult question, which has been answered by a number of reports in relation to austerity and particular deprivation challenges that go back many years. This has been a problem that has been growing in Scotland for decades, but it's one that I'm determined that we take action to turn around, and using the best knowledge we have, using the new innovative ideas that people have been rolling out. There's a number of innovations which the pandemic has encouraged us to take forward, which are encouraging more people to come into treatment than before. One of the biggest barriers that we see to treatment in Scotland is stigma and that's one of the things that we need to challenge.
There has been previous mention of devolving aspects of the Misuse of Drugs Act to try different solutions for Scotland. What would Scotland do differently from the rest of the UK?
So if we had all of the powers, then I'd be very keen that we look at options similar to the types of options that we see in Portugal, for instance, and that's at the widest extent, where from all levels of the programme we look at this through a public health lens rather than a criminal justice lens. But taking a step back from that, there are a number of other innovations that we could take forward from a public health perspective if we were able to change the drugs laws, such as overdose prevention facilities, which evidence worldwide shows will save lives.
In terms of the drug consumption facility, obviously there's been a lot of coverage over Peter Crikant and his van in Glasgow. He's saying that he's going to be coming to Holyrood tomorrow. Will you be visiting that injecting van tomorrow to see how it works?
So it's not appropriate for me to comment on Mr Crikant's work while there's a live case ongoing. As I say, I have visited the facility in Paris, which is a clinically and legally safe environment. I was hugely impressed by that. I had hoped to go and visit other similar facilities in Germany, Portugal and Canada, but unfortunately COVID has stopped all of those visits. But I think the international evidence that a legally and clinically safe overdose prevention facility will save lives.
I mean, obviously you've faced calls to resign today, and accusations the Scottish Government has really taken the eye off the ball when it comes to addiction services and treatment. Do you accept that? Do you accept that the Scottish Government could have been doing more in the last 6 years to try and stop the trend of record drug deaths?
Well, look, people can make politics from an issue like this if they want to. I'm not going to. I'm focused on doing what I can to turn this around, to make sure that everybody who is blighted by alcohol and drug addiction in Scotland to get the services that they need to help them into recovery.
We can speak to Darren McGarvey, who's written extensively about Scotland's drug crisis. Darren, welcome to the programme. Another horrendous set of figures. The question that nobody seems to be able to answer is, why are drugs deaths in Scotland so bad? Do you have an answer to that?
The drug deaths map quite directly onto the higher levels of social deprivation, and as we see with the uptake of alcoholism, addiction, obesity, Scotland for decades has always topped the wrong kind of lists. The specific reasons for why these negative social trends are so extreme is obviously up for debate, but the fact that they are extreme isn't. I'm just listening to the Minister for Public Health, Joe Fitzpatrick there. He cuts a rather lonely and isolated figure. If you analyse in Parliament his body language, his tone, his mental agility, the shoulder shrugging, the constant deflection, the reading notes scrawled in his left hand, he just looks and sounds defeated. He just doesn't strike me as a figure who can lead this debate. He appears to be constantly caught in the headlights of his own brief, and he absolutely has to resign.
OK, well, I mean, I'm going to get back to the point of Joe Fitzpatrick in just a second, but you mentioned there, the levels of social deprivation. If this is down to social deprivation and poverty, then why are we seeing countries far less prosperous than Scotland, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania, do far, far better than us?
Because you can have countries where poverty is worse, but inequality isn't as extreme. So at the beginning of this pandemic, on a question time appearance, I put forward the idea that perhaps in America and Britain we're seeing higher than usual mortality rates because America and Britain have the highest levels of inequality of any developed economies. So there seems to be a correlation between how much wealth a country can generate and then how it mismanages its wealth and to the detriment of people in poverty. So it's not necessarily about comparing poor countries with wealthy countries. Our country is mismanaged. Now, I recognise that's not all within the competence of the Scottish Government, but even if you take the Scottish Government's plan for a post-independence Scotland, they basically want to roll out the exact same economic model.
OK. I mean, you mentioned there that you would like Joe Fitzpatrick to resign. I mean, he has said that they have invested more money. He says they're looking at innovative ways to solve this problem. What are your ideas? What would you like to see them doing right now?
Well, Favour UK and many other organisations and academics with a bit of skin in the game here and prepared to talk politically incorrectly about some things have put forward some basic suggestions, one of them obviously being to reinstate the availability of residential rehabs, because we've been getting spun this line that there's not a great deal of evidence that they work. This is one of a number of cornerstones of this kind of argument that comes from the Scottish Government that's actually untrue. And also it's interesting that drug rehabilitation and residential care is held to such a high standard when it seems to me that so many of the Scottish Government's flagship policies are in part faith-based in the first place. The argument that the ageing cohort is destroyed when you look at the fact that 61% of those who died are under 45, 91% are under 55. This idea that drug policy not being devolved is the issue. I don't see how, because in England, where the same legislation is used and where austerity is even harsher because there's no SNP or Labour administration to soften the blow, the deaths here are 3 times worse than that. And the idea that the figures are higher in Scotland because we count them differently, that was found by the Ferret today to be 100% false. So, you know, if they want to make this about drug consumption rooms because they can then deflect the question, that's fine. But the drug consumption rooms are important, but they are a sidebar to the more fundamental problem of governance around this issue and accountability.
OK, Darren McGarvey, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and insights with us tonight. Now,